part of our program. I'm also mindful of our time. One of the landmarks of Masonry is never stand between a Mason and his lunch. So I'll do that. I want to save time for questions and answers at the conclusion of it. In addition to that, I do have prepared remarks which I will leave with the conference so that you at least will have some things at a later time to refer back to here with what we're talking about. I'm going to be speaking a little bit about some introductory and preface material so we can all be on the same page. And I know that in a group such as this, we have some that have a great deal of knowledge about our degrees and Freemasonry itself, and some that may have a less amount of knowledge. And I also acknowledge and know that we have differing rights that convey the degrees of Masonry. I've been pleased to learn up here in Manitoba about your two different basic rituals that you have. A fascinating thing for that. I will be speaking, of course, from the context of a ritual in California, which I believe in Manitoba you call the ancient York type of ritual. All of our rituals, of course, go back to a common origin. So as we see the different kinds in the world, it's easy for us to understand how they evolved over time to share the story of Freemasonry itself. If you go back, for example, to what we think may have been the earliest of the degrees, they very likely were conferred in a room very much like this around a table. Some of the things that we know of from the earliest representation of our degrees echo that, and there's still things in our lodges today of whatever writer degree that exemplify that. If we go back and study the remains of the materials that we have, we also know that in the earliest times there was probably a very simple admission ceremony. Probably an entered apprentice when he took on the full responsibilities of an apprentice in 16, 17, 18, somewhere along in there, and he was entrusted with the certain secrets of the craft. We also know that there was an earlier time something associated with the installation of the master of the lodge. A lot of this stuff is extremely vague because we really haven't figured it out, sorted it all out from the record yet. But our third degree, the master's part, very obviously has a little older origin than when it comes into Masonry as a third degree. One of the sources of this that I would recommend to you and that I reference in the book here is the collected Prestonian lectures. You have a copy of that book or access to it. The Prestonian lecture for 1925 by Lionel Weaver is an excellent place for anyone who wants to understand the origin of our degrees to begin. There have been some developments since 1925, whether it's papers published in other research societies, including Ottawa Coronati, but it's a good basic place to begin. And in that particular one, he talks about the simple ceremonies that we had in, let's say, the 1720s. We know that sometime in the 1720s, the simple admission ceremony was divided into two, and he explains how that happened. That became our fellowcraft degree, growing out of the entered apprentice degree, which explains why it's very much like the structure of the entered apprentice degree. He also talks about the role of the master's part, which by 1730, and our first major revelation about it, as we call it, and exposure, Richard's Masonry II, shows us for the first time that the three-degree system is going to become the standard for Freemasonry. It's also something that we know from these earlier records and things that a discussion of what the ceremony meant to those who were candidates was important to a lodge. In the earliest days, we know from what's left over that someone would talk about what the ceremony was using symbols, usually painted on the floor of the lodge or marked with chalk and with charcoal. Those were later transferred to a little more permanent base. We know tables like this that were trestle tables with the flip side of it would be used, hence the term trestle board, which later had the name of tracing board. Many of our jurisdictions still have that. And some of the things that our lodges use today, using computerized instruction, really are just lineal descendants of those early pictures on the floor. We also are pretty sure that the lectures describing what happened in the ceremony in the beginning were extemporaneous, that knowledgeable brethren would talk about what these symbols meant in Freemasonry, and they came together and became embedded in what were called the catechism type of lectures in Freemasonry. So in the 18th century, by a certain point, you would have a marriage of two things that would be communicated to a new Mason in his lodge. First would be some what I call catch questions, things that would catch you out to find out if you truly were a Mason. And if you needed that, you would use that to visit other lodges if you go to prove that you were a Mason. We didn't have photo IDs and Jews cards in those days, so you had to have some way of proving that. And these catch questions are embedded in the early, quote, lectures that we find in the exposés and other places. You get the Knut Hammer Jones book, for example. It's a great place to pick these out, although nowadays on the internet, all this stuff really is readily available, and so it's something that you certainly can find if you want to see what these early lectures look like. As our degrees and our lectures evolve, it's pretty evident that some brethren were better at explaining Masonry than others. So as a consequence, by the time we get toward the middle and then the end of the 18th century, there tends to appear some standardized versions of some of the lectures. Thanks to Worshipful Brother Sean Eyre, I've had fun tracing some of these down. An example that's not really germane to this paper, but I for a long time wondered about the lecture of the second degree. Now, of course, we use the ancient working in California, as many American lodges do. And there's this beautiful poetry in there that the master described. Numberless worlds are around us, all framed by the same divine artist, which roll through the vast expanse. You know, it's beautiful poetry for me. So I have been interested in where it came from. Well, Sean's research showed me that it actually came from a lecture delivered in Scotland in 1741 by a brother by the name of Leslie. And it's all recounted in an article in Quatuor Coronati Transactions in 1961 if you're interested in pursuing that particular thing. But much of what we know, we can't identify quite that easily. We know that by the last part of the century, that some of the best material was captured by William Preston in his Illustrations of Masonry in 1772. And that is sort of the grandfather of lectures in many, if not most, American jurisdictions at least. Preston's work was heavily edited and revised in 1797 by Thomas Smith Webb. As our Grand Lodges moved across the continent and new ones were created, that book became the basis of what Grand Lodges adopted as their lectures of Freemasonry. And so as I visited various other Grand Lodges in the United States and seen the lectures given, it's obvious that some Grand Lodges like this and some Grand Lodges like that, and the variations really are a hapstance of history, how various Masons at various times in creating their Grand Lodge ritual chose to describe Masonry. But behind all of that, before those what I call narrative lectures occurred, were these much older question and answer types of lectures. We call them catechal lectures because it comes from a different tradition, a religious tradition. In the 2nd, 3rd, and into the 4th century, in the Christian church in the Mediterranean area, for example, instruction was usually given to candidates coming into the church in a question and answer format. Now, if you'd like to see what that looks like today, you go online and look at any site that has catechism instruction for the Roman Catholic Church. In the United States, if you pick a book of common prayer from the Episcopal Church, you can see the remains of that kind of instruction still there, embedded in it. Freemasonry's earliest ways of talking about these things was that sort of lecture. It was a question and answer. Catch questions melded with explanations alongside it. And so, for example, in our ritual in California, an entered apprentice is asked, whence came you? And the response is, from a lodge of the Holy Saints John in Jerusalem. What came you here to do? To learn to subdue my passions and improve myself in Masonry. And you're a Mason, I presume. I am so taken and accepted among brothers and fellows. That's really a catch question thing because there's no logical sequence to that. It's just there as a part of that. But from that point on, in these question and answer lectures as we have inherited, there is now an explanation of what Freemasonry is. Were you first prepared to be made a Mason? In my heart. We're next, within the body of a just and legally constituted lodge, and so on and so on. And you go through this whole elaborate thing. At some point in lodges where they decided to replace those early lectures in whatever form they were, to replace them with telling a story, a narrative lecture, as a sermon would be a narrative lecture. The responsibility for learning those older lectures was transferred to the candidate. And in many Grand Lodges, including California, a candidate was required to learn the old lecture and then deliver it in open lodge to prove that he knew something about it. In fact, in our lectures in California, we even refer to that. Beginning of the narrative lecture for the entered apprentice degree says that, my brother, the lecture of the entered apprentice degree is divided into three sections. The first being a recapitulation of the ceremonies through which you've just passed will be omitted. Well, why is it omitted? Because the candidate's going to learn it on his own and have to deliver it in open lodge. And that was the tradition that we inherited from the founding of our Grand Lodge in 1850, which in turn came from all those other Grand Lodges in the Midwest and back east that were our progenitors in receiving Freemasonry into our jurisdiction. So when I was a young Mason, I came in entered apprentice on May 28, 1964, a long time back. That's what I learned, place of proficiency. I would be in lodge, have to give the memorized proficiency, deliver it. The master was satisfied, the master makes that decision in California. I could proceed to the fellowcraft degree. And if I did a similar proficiency as that and gave in the open lodge, then I would be eligible to be raised a Master Mason. In those days, we had to also complete a third degree, a Master Mason's lecture, in order to enjoy all the rights and privileges of Masonry. That was abandoned in California sometime in the 1980s, and along with other changes that I'll talk to you about in just a moment, we began a process of reducing what our candidates had to learn. The concern grew in the 1990s in Freemasonry in the United States in general, and I think California was illustrative of this as well. A great concern that men were coming into Masonry and becoming entered apprentice Masons and never going anywhere. They did not become fellowcraft Masons, did not become Master Masons. California, that was a bit of a problem because the shrine was extremely popular, and to be a Shriner in those days, you had to be a Knight Templar or a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason. You couldn't be either one of those if you weren't a Master Mason. And so there was a lot of pressure on our Grand Lodge to do something about this from brethren who valued the shrine, and even from some of those that were very active in these other two rites in California. How do we get men to be Master Masons more quickly? So in 1997 rather, our Grand Lodge amended our law to only require a candidate, an entered apprentice to be on the fellowcraft, to memorize the obligation of the first degree and the modes and signs of recognition. The same legislation said if you want to be a Master Mason, that's all you have to do is fellowcraft. You have to learn the obligation as a fellowcraft Mason and be able to prove that you are a fellowcraft Mason. Curiously enough, we didn't amend any of the legislation pertaining to the third degree lectures. But since by that time it wasn't required for anything except becoming senior deacon and on up in the lodge, we didn't pay much attention to that. The lodges later discovered that they had sort of pulled the rug out from under the feet of their future officers line by the fact that they had all these men coming through that had never learned the work, and now all of a sudden you want to be senior deacon of your lodge, you've got to learn the third degree lecture in catechism, question and answer form for the very first time if you had never done it before. So even from the get-go, it was a bit of a problem. One of the other things, by way of preface to what I'll be talking about with our new program in California of candidate education in the electronic age, was the observation from many of us involved in Masonic education that simply memorizing something was not tantamount to understanding something. And a lot of us that were involved in this sort of thing in Freemasonry during the 80s and on into the 90s weren't very supportive of these memorized lectures because it seemed as if all you did was memorize it and forget it as quickly as you could, just to get yourself through the degrees or to be an officer of the lodge. And if it had no meaning, then it raised questions as to whether or not we ought to be doing it in the first place. And a lot of us actually voted for shortening the proficiency, something we probably wouldn't do knowing what we know now about the consequences, but we did for these reasons. We felt that why would we want to waste our time on this old material that no one understands? Let's talk about what Masonry means in doing that. Probably a mistake, but there we were at the end of it. So in 1997, we didn't have any candidate education program except memorizing it. Well, in 1998, our Grand Master said, who was actually very involved in Masonic Education, what we voted last year really wasn't a smart idea. We need to put something back about what a candidate needs to learn and understand in order to be a Mason. So he proposed a resolution which was adopted that year of what we call in California the Basic Candidate Education Program. Now, brother, and I would assure you that basic was the most important and operative word in that whole list. It was basic. It was so simple that anyone could pass it. We produced a pamphlet to explain this to our candidates, and what our law was when it was adopted is you had to read the material, you had about 5 pages, and you had to answer some questions at the back, all in the book, right? Write some answers, and you had to file it with the Secretary of the Lodge, and now you knew everything you needed to know about Masonry, or ever had introduced to Masonry. I was Grand Secretary at the time, and there was an enormous amount of pressure on our Grand Lodge to give the answers to the lodges. So we finally did. We set out, well, if this is your question, what is the meaning of a rough ashland, a perfect ashland? You write out what the answer is and you send it to the lodge, and we quickly discovered that what lodges were doing is giving it to the candidate, write it down to keep Grand Lodge off our back, file it so you can get your degree. Well, what does a rough ashlar mean? I don't know what it means. I don't know what an ashlar is, but that's what they said we had to write, so that's what you do. And by the end of the 1990s, the first part of the next decade, this was an absolutely abysmal situation for us, and we might have even been stuck in the same kind of a swamp, except for something that happened to our lodges, starting around 10, 12 years ago. Men began to come to Masonry who wanted to know something about Masonry. And our candidates would start to come into the lodges, and they had knowledge of Masonry. They had gone on the internet, they had read books, they had talked to people about it out there. And so, at the end of that first degree, they were absolutely eager to know something about Freemasonry. And here's one of the officers of the lodge saying, it doesn't make any difference what it means, just about keep Grand Lodge hacking off our backs. Well, is there anything else to this? No, I don't know anything else about it. These men had gone through what I call the dry patch of Masonic education. They had become leaders of our lodges during a time period in which knowing anything about Masonry was considered to be superfluous. Here are these eager new candidates wanting to know more about it. Well, we revised our booklets, and we developed a program to help some of our lodges explain what Freemasonry was all about, with some modest success. The lodges that increasingly had these young men as officers took to it eagerly. They were the ones that wanted to do this, to talk to their own new brothers coming into the fraternity, while the older members sort of receded into the background, and in some places, this new interest in knowing what Masonry meant began a resurgence. And so we revised our booklets. We developed some instructional programs. We developed a jurisdiction-wide training program for education officers. I'll compliment the Grand Lodge of Manitoba and many of the other Grand Lodges that I know have met here. You seem to be far ahead of California in developing a lodge education officer and doing these kinds of things that we didn't discover that you apparently discovered and latched on to at a much earlier stage. But we still had a fundamental problem that these paper booklets and these answers out there that we were getting were not what we wanted a man to know about masonry. So we started looking at this about 3 years ago in a very serious fashion. How could we recreate something that would be a totally different experience? And by way of preface to what I'll show you on the slides, these are some of the decisions that we made. We decided, first of all, that we had to get around the roadblock of any of our lodges whose members didn't really care what a candidate knew about masonry. Had to get around that. Had to do something that would not let them stop this eager enthusiasm to learn something about masonry. Secondly, we recognized that our new Masons coming in are part of the electronic generation.
Place is on fire.
I'll wait till that's finished.
Too much hot air.
If you want to read the entire thing behind there, you may find it is less jumping into it because there's an explanation for it. What we decided to do in California was to get around our lodges and to provide something at the Grand Lodge level directly to the candidate. Now that's kind of a revolution for us. We realize and recognize the importance of a lodge. You can't make a Mason other than a lodge, but to make this work, we decided to go directly to the candidates. And this program that I'm going to be showing you here is just now being launched in California. It's in our beta testing version. It will be launched fully this summer with our lodges and showcased at our annual communication in October. So I apologize, but I dropped out a whole part of the things leading up to why I'm here on this. Let's see if I can cover this and pick up enough time for us to ask some questions at the end. So the title of this part of it is the Basic Education Program, the Digital Education Program. And you can look at that up here. The background is what I kind of shared with you earlier. We have to do the basic education program according to our law. It wasn't doing very good, and it was done through paper booklets. But what we did as a part of our need analysis was this, that every member, every candidate becoming a Mason and progressing to being a Master Mason has to know something about Masonry that we think is important. We also believe that our members live in the world of technology, and making it available to them will be an important part of the process. We hope to bring our lodges into this process as a part of it, but it's still an individual thing in the phase that I'm describing here. And again, I'm shortcutting the presentation a bit to do that. We also wanted to be able to track the participation. We don't know what our candidates are learning if we don't find out. And this system provides a way of doing that. And the last one, to me, as a Mason, is terribly important. We don't want our Masons to quit learning when they get the third degree. We want it to become a passion for no Mason to deliver for their entire lifetime. So here was our solution. We actually found a company that was engaged in digital learning. And we interviewed quite a few. We found a firm, curiously enough, and it was actually in the Bay Area in California, although we looked nationwide for this. Maybe because Silicon Valley and things out there are a big part of the California stuff, we found firms that were doing that. And this partnership with Cube Learning has been in and of itself an absolutely fascinating learning experience for me. I was deeply involved in this because I served on the task force that put this thing together. So pretty conversant with it. It had to be secure. It had to be something that you have to be an under apprentice or a telegraph or a Master Mason in one of our lodges to participate in it. And then it had to have text geared toward digital learning. I'm going to show you a few pages in just a moment with that. But we also knew that with an electronic format, we could provide many other things we couldn't do in a paper format. It could be video clips, for example, and graphics, and especially links to other sources. I'll show you some of those in a few moments. Cube company in their learning also had what they call games. Now that sounds like having fun with things, and games are fun to play. But games can have a purpose. My background in teaching and education made it easier for me to understand how in the education process that kind of thing could function effectively. And so we have that as a part of it. And then lastly, from the Grand Lodge standpoint, we wanted to know if our investment was actually paying off. So, text was written, videos are now in production or just being finished up. This was actually this slide was made for our Western Conference in February, so we've made a lot of progress since then. And we are doing candidates of various kinds, and the reports coming in are very positive. Let me show you what a page looks like here. This is, and I'm a little bit of disadvantage. I'm going to move over just slightly so I can see the screen better, because I'm not able to see my laptop picture there. When you log on, the night you get your first degree, you then are given a password to log on to our site. An editor apprentice will log on to that, and if he clicks on the button that says EA instruction, that will tell him what he needs to know. If he clicks on the other two, it doesn't take him anywhere. It says, wait a time with patience, or something like that. You'll get there. And this is typical of the whole page itself. It's designed to be intuitive, to let you know where you're going within it. There's a message over here, welcome to Cube Learning, and so on, that tells you how to do this. Then when you go to the next page, that's your first welcome message in there. It's a welcome to the entered apprentice. Not depending upon the lodge to now instruct him. They will, we hope, be an active participant in learning to be what it means to be an entered apprentice Mason, but he will be logging on to do this. Incidentally, every one of our entered apprentices will be assigned a mentor and a candidate's coach. We hope that those, in many cases, will be the same person, but they could be a different person, different Mason. Those individuals have access to this information. So we have linked the lodge in that capacity. So he is working with the individual. Yes?
You talked in terms of giving an entered apprentice a password, and you're also talking in terms of being able to track participation. Does your entered apprentice in your lodge get a different password than the entered apprentice in my lodge, so we know that
Yes.
that entered apprentice?
Correct.
Okay.
In fact, a very good question with that. Right now, every entered apprentice is given access to his own personal homepage on our website. So it will be, in fact, the same. He goes in there and resets his password so that he does that. And that gives him access to lots of stuff already within our Masonic Education program and access to materials and things. So this is just part of that larger picture. Thank you. Good question on that. I won't spend a huge amount of time on this because I want to show you how some of the stuff interacts on that. But we want to have purpose on every page. So why is this important? Well, we want you to understand as an entered apprentice why it's that way. You realize, from my standpoint, some of the weakness behind this is that we still are depending upon the individual himself to truly understand that. And we know that our entered apprentices are all across the spectrum. We have some that come in with a graduate degree in college, and some of them may have an 8th grade education. We have designed it, and the wording is aimed toward 8th grade. Now, that may sound to you like dumbing things down, but from our standpoint, we'd rather have someone understand what it means than to have something that is elegant from an academic standpoint. In addition to that, we have a very large number of Masons in California whose language, English, is not their primary language. And as a result, we have to deal with that issue that English has to be in a format that they can easily understand. Down below is the entered apprentice instruction. If you wanted to know more, you would click on that. There's a brief thing over here in this lower corner, how to read this book and how to play the games, if you want to know that, a shorter version of the other. And then down at the bottom there is recommended reading, and that shows up on most pages. Part of the difference in this program and our previous booklets is that this is a dynamic program, not a static program. So not only can we update it, the candidate himself, depending upon his interest and enthusiasm, can do as much or as little. There will be a minimal part of this, but there's really not any maximum. As we design this, we expect it to be for the really eager, enthusiastic learner, something much bigger. So let's take a look at this entered apprentice instruction. Of course, the paper pamphlets in California have the same cover, so we tie them in thematically into what he will be learning. Cube Learning in its programs tries to make it look and feel like a paper book. So that's why you see this design like this. And it's from the bookshelf of, and it says Mason Tester 3. If I were an entered apprentice, there would be my name up there. So there would be my book. And for more information about how to use it, in every page, there's places to go with that in case you don't know where you're going. And Down at the bottom are things that will help you to get navigated, just like any good web page would. I'm going to go on and move through the slides to show you this. If we had a lot of time and good internet connectivity, I could actually go in there and show you how it works dynamically, but I won't be able to do that today. One of the first things we had to decide was, what does a man need to learn about masonry? Sean last night in his talk talked about the fact that he's developed various curricula over the years. What ought a Mason to learn? Many of you in this room have been involved in Masonic education, have done that. You have to decide what it is you teach. We made a decision when we set up our first program that our curriculum would be based upon the degrees themselves. That would be the framework, and upon the current lectures that we have in California. So you could do anything else other than that, but this is what we made the decision, and this is consistent with that. So section 1 up there, what is Freemasonry? What are tools and symbols? Section 2, what about initiation process? And if you work your way down through that, you see we have, or will have, information when you get to that page about what to be prepared as a candidate means. What does a hoodwink and a cable tow mean? What is circumambulation? What is secrecy? What are those penalties that we have to deal with? We still have those in our ritual in California. And over to the right-hand side, the third section really echoes the last part of the lecture of the Entered Apprentice degree in California. Tools and symbols. The lodge itself. The lodge is, described in our longer lectures. What are the movable, immovable jewels? And if you have some of those things in your lectures, you will recognize some of those themes. Then last, tenets and virtues. What do we want the candidate to know out of that lecture? And we'll show you in just a moment how there's an interaction to get the candidate actively engaged with that. And at the end, what have you learned? I want to concentrate on the word journals there. Each candidate in this program is encouraged to keep his own electronic journal of his experiences. It's shared anonymously with everyone in the database. So if I write down, my impression of a rough ashland is that I start out in life like I am now, and I could be better tomorrow. And I write that down, it's a simple thing. Because it's listed in the entire system. A candidate from an apprentice down in San Diego would be able to look at the database and say, hey, John's definition is pretty good. My definition said Mason is like a rough rock. Not quite as good as the other definition. So I can rethink what I'm doing of mine based upon others. But the recording of that in the journal eventually ends up permanent. And the idea behind the concept of lifelong learning is 50 years from now, I should be able to go back and see what John thought of being an apprentice in May of 1964 versus what he's doing in 2013. Did I learn anything in all of those years, 49 years that I've been a Mason? Have I grown? Have I understood a lot more as a result of that? And that journal is a part of that. Again, because of our time, I am skipping a little bit more, and I'll answer questions if you have them later. We use a lot of graphics and artwork in our symbols here, so this is important into it. Some of these cases, some of these will actually be video clips. So we produced a film last year for Annual Communication on the history of the Masonic apron. That's going to be as a part of this particular page down here. So if you want to know more about what a Masonic apron is, you'll click on the apron here. It'll take you to that video clip on the
John,
site.
will there be a person that's narrating that in the video?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because the video was already produced last year.
Yeah, okay.
That'll be a part of it. And all these things become permanent part of our stock of things. And then looking at what we call overarching lessons. The Entered Apprentice has two overarching purposes. Again, it's focus. We're not relying upon individual lodges and Masons of those lodges to truly understand Masonry. We hope they will, and hope they'll become an active participant in it. But from our standpoint, there really are two essential things about that first degree of Masonry. One is secrecy. I will not write, indict, print, cut, carve, you know all the rest of that. That's an important concept to understand. And the other is, what is the meaning of brotherhood? And we could have picked other themes, I suppose. You would, if you were doing this, maybe have a different take, but in California, this is what we wanted to do that. How will these lessons change your approach to situations in which you may encounter. So the idea is, it's got to make a personal difference in being a Mason in this thing. We want you to continue to think about that. And again, these links, you start a game, I'll show you a game in just a moment, it comes up here. We want it to be fun, but we want it to be a learning activity. So all the games are designed to do that. Scores are kept. You can compete against yourself. You can compete against others of the same rank, jurisdiction-wide, to see how you do. There's detailed instructions on there, and there are 5 different difficulty levels. This happens to be a level 3. You choose that. A mentor and a candidate's coach would probably help a candidate that wasn't quite as proficient in this do this choice on that. And here's an example. Divestiture all minerals and metals, one of the more esoteric parts, frankly, of the first degree of Masonry. So the candidates ask these questions. Why do we do that? Well, so that nothing may be lost by the candidate? Probably not. So that the candidate may bring nothing in the lodge to disrupt its peace and harmony? That's, in this illustration, the right answer, because that's the answer in our lectures. Those of you that are conversant with the more esoteric side of Freemasonry know there's lots of other explanations other than the ones that our historic lectures deliver. But we didn't want to get too far off our primary, so that's why that turns out to be the right answer. No distinction may be made between Masons based upon material work. That's also an accepted one, and they're kept in the system. And there's a page with the journal. We've tried to introduce some classic Masonic type of art to just keep the style that our work is old, and we think that is a value, as well as being contemporary. And there's a summary page. You can go back and restudy if you need to before your advancement. I am personally hoping that when our candidates meet on a weekly basis in our, we call Masonic formation in California, but they'll work on some of these things together. We know our Masons travel, some are all over the world. It's not necessary that we're going to all be able in the same room to do things, but when you are, the idea is to work with some of these things together, which will help those that are perhaps less computer savvy and literate. We also are encouraging our candidates to set up teams. The lodge has several fellow crafts. We'd like them to form a team, kind of internal competition with each other. So in summary, we expect to provide all members with the same standard of education, jurisdiction-wide. We want members to know that we use technology to meet those expectations. We want to track those centrally so that we can understand, are we doing a good job or are we not doing a good job? And for me, the strongest one of all of it is to develop lifelong learners in this. That's what we're going to do. So, with that, are there any questions that you have before we turn it back to Ms. Horschel and our...
Do coaches and mentors interact both electronically and face-to-face?
Yes, that's correct. That's what the model provides. Correct.
I saw in the bottom of the right-hand corner of the first slide, it said copyright.
Yes.
Who owns that copyright?
We own the copyright as a ground law.
It must be a charge for someone else.
Believe it or not, you're not the first one who's asked that question. Yes, we showed this at the Western Conference of Grand Masters. The simple answer is, we are hoping that our basic investment in this, which is fairly significant, will eventually bring down the cost so that it's affordable to other Grand Lodges that don't have the resources that Grand Lodge of California has. We're very fortunate that our California Masonic Foundation funds the Institute for Masonic Studies, which actually put this together. Our brethren over the years have been very generous with that, some significant donations. The cost for the development of the 3 degrees for all of the software things is right at $75,000. But that being said, we believe that there will be an appropriate time in the future to make this available to other Grand Lodges and they wish to participate. And obviously, as with any new product, it will become cheaper over time because you have taken care of your initial investment. We have a leadership training program we use interactive right now in California, and we essentially paid all the development costs of that, so we have a very modest maintenance fee for that software program, and I hope that this will be the same kind of thing.
Thank you, John.
Other questions that you have?
How many Masons are in California?
We have, counting our apprentices in polygraph, 61,000. We have 54,000 instruments. That's a fairly good number.
That's a good number.
Not the biggest brand launch, but a good number. Well, thank you for this, and I'll be around the rest of the conference if you have any questions to ask.